So we're looking at section 11.4, and this is the section on stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And the idea of stocks, it's sort of like raising money. Let's say you're in the 19th century and you want to start a gold mining operation. There's this place in, say, northern New Mexico where you think there's gold. There's going to be a lot of gold. Well, the thing is, you don't have any money to buy the equipment or to hire people to help you dig up the gold. So what can you do? Well, one way to raise the money is to sell stock. Stock is where you sell a kind of ownership in your company. So first off, take a look at stocks here. So stock is really a share, or it's really a kind of an ownership of a company. When you buy stock, you purchase part, I'll explain what this means, of a company. So what you're doing is, of course, when you purchase this part in the company, you give the company money, and so they use this money to, say, go out and dig up that gold. Now, what you purchase, though, it's not a factory floor, it's not a bulldozer. What it is a right. You're purchasing a right. What the part is, it's a right to share in profits and losses. That's what you're buying. It's this right to share in the profits and losses of the company. So you're going to give them $100, and they're going to say, well, okay, so since you gave us $100, you're guaranteed so much a percent of, say, what we get a profit of. If they make a profit, it's not guaranteed. So it's a bit of a risk. It's a gamble. But a company, if you talk to these people, they seem sensible, and there's certain rules about stocks. There's certain information that you can't have because it's not fair to others if you have an inside bit of information. But if you do this legally, you might come to the conclusion that this company seems like they're onto something. They know where this gold is. The technique that they want to use to extract it seems viable. So all right, I'll give them, say, $100, and I'll be guaranteed some amount or some percent of the profit. So that's what it means to buy stock in a company. Now, how much do you purchase? Well, we measure the amount of stock you purchased in shares. It's measured in shares. So let's say they're going to do $100 a share. So you might buy one share. And that share will guarantee you so much profit. If you want to have more profit coming your way, you buy more shares. And again, it's kind of a risk. It might not work out. There's sort of a history of people raising money to go search for gold in the hills, at least in the 19th century. And didn't always work out. So a few more terms here. Sort of a vocabulary heavy section. So someone who owns stock, a stock owner, is called, let's see here, stockholders. And since we measure stock in shares, we call them shareholders. So the amount of profit you receive per share, we call that the dividend. Dividends, the amount of profit per share. So one of the things you might be asked to do is compute the total amount you're getting from your shares. So let's say you have something like this. Suppose you own 350 shares, each earning $2.31 as a dividend. So the question we might want to ask is, how much do you receive from your shares? Well, what we do is we take the number of shares times the dividend. And so what that gives us, we'll have 350 times $2.31. And in total, what that's going to be is $808.50. Now, something else they talk about, and what you're going to see in this section are different ways of measuring sort of the same thing. So one of the things this isn't quite like that, but we're going to talk about what's called dividend yield. And what we do with dividend yield is we're comparing the dividend to the price of the share. Now this is just a single share, not all the shares put together. So make sure my speakers those are good. So we're going to compare the dividend, how much your profit you're getting from owning the share, to the price of the share. Now there's two ways you could do this. One way is to just compute a ratio. Now this is usually going to be a percent. So one thing is we can take the dividend divided by the price times 100%. That would give you the dividend yield. Now the way they do it in the text is a little different. What they do in the text is they have you use the simple interest formula. And so the way they use it is this. This here is the dividend. And this here will be the price of the share. R is the dividend yield. And then T, just let T be 1. And so that's how they handle this in the text. So let me go through an example of how they do this. So let's see here. And I'll do it the book method, and then I'll use the ratio method. So let's say we have this. A share with a price of, let's see here, $40. As a dividend yield of 50 cents. Or a dividend, I'm sorry, dividend of 50 cents. I'm sorry. We're going to find the dividend yield. And so we find the dividend yield. So what we do, if we use the ratio method, we take the dividend, divide by the price, multiply by 100%. And when we do that, we get 1.25%. So that would be it. That would be your dividend yield. Now, the way the book does it, they use that simple interest formula. And so the way this works, we take I as PRT. I is the dividend, so that's 0.50. P is the price, in this case, $40. We don't know the dividend yield. That's going to be R. We let T be 1. So if we multiply this together, get 40R, and then we divide both sides by 40. And so we get 0.50 over 40 equals R. And so if we run that number there, run that calculation, we get 0.0125. Now, they want a percent. So that means we have to multiply by 100 to get the percent. Gives you 1.25%. So that's how the book is doing it. So you could do it either way. You could use the ratio method or the simple interest method. Either way will work. All right. So they talk about how this works. So first off, stock is sold, it's bought and sold. And the price for a share of stock is based on what someone's willing to sell it for and what someone's willing to buy it for. And if the person who wants to sell has a price, if the person who wants to buy, well, that's the same price, then you'll see a transaction. There'll be some kind of a buying and selling going on. So what we call the market value of a share is the price for which, I'm just going to use the definition in the text, a stockholder is willing to sell So the stockholder has to be willing to sell the share at this price, and let's see, a buyer is willing to buy at that price. So it's an agreed upon price. And so that's kind of a special thing. I mean, some people want to sell way too high. Some people want to buy way too low, and you try to figure it out, and there you go. So this typically occurs at a stock market or a stock exchange. And this is where stock in companies is bought and sold. So it's where it's bought and sold. There's some famous stock exchanges. There's the New York Stock Exchange, there's the Tokyo Stock Exchange, there's the London Stock Exchange. But it's where stock in companies is bought and sold. People are buying and selling shares. So now you might not be able to be there. I mean, we have our jobs here, and we're not necessarily going to be in Tokyo, New York, or London. So what can happen is a brokerage firm might do this for us. We might call them up and say, hey, I want to buy some stock, or I have some stock to sell. So brokerage firm helps you buy and sell stock. So that's what they do. So you're here, you're going to contact them, and they're going to set this up. So you don't have to actually be at the stock market to do these transactions. You'll contact a brokerage firm. They're going to help you do it. The actual individuals who do this are stockbrokers. I'm spelling that correctly. And these stockbrokers who help you do this, they often earn a commission. So this is the thing that helps. I mean, again, we can't be there at these stock exchanges, but these stock brokerage firms, they could help us out. The stockbrokers will help us actually do the buying and the selling, and they earn a commission for doing this. So there's some terms we're going to go over regarding stock. And they're going to be on pages 663 and 664. And I'm just going to go through these, just sort of help kind of maybe translate them a little bit. So we have what's called open. Now, these are all properties of a stock. So or a share of stock. Let's set that out right now. Again, you buy stock in a company, and how much you buy, we measure in these shares or certificates. So what we have is a stock market. I think on the West Coast, I think it would be for the New York Stock Exchange, it was like 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time. And what that means, it's only open for part of the day. It's not a 24-hour thing. And when the stock market opens, the share will have some initial value. So that's what open means. It's the price when the market opens. Now, what's going to happen is throughout the day, throughout the time that the market's open, the value of this share is going to go up and down. So we have the opening price. We have what's called high-low. And what this is, it's the highest slash lowest price for that share on that day. And again, this is when the market is open. So you have the high slash low. And then we have the close price. So this is the price of the share when the market closes. So we have the price of the share when it closes, or the price when it opens. It'll reach some highest price and some lowest price throughout the day. So it's changing all the time is what it is. Now, let's take a look at that change. So we have what's called a net change. So what this is, you can see, so this is how much today's, let me just see how they're saying this. Well, it's how much change. Let me think of a better way of putting this. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare today's closing price to the closing price of the previous day. We're comparing today's closing price to the closing price of the previous day. So like for today's closing price was $7, and yesterday's closing price was $5.50, then the net change is going to be $1.50, or $7 minus $5.50. So we're comparing today's closing price with the closing price from the previous day. So that's the net change. Now you have percent change. And it's the same idea. We're comparing today's closing price with the previous day's closing price. So what it's going to be is the percent change. Between today's closing price and the previous closing price, or previous day's closing price. So that's our percent change. And they make a little point here. If it's positive, it's a percent increase. If it's negative, you have a percent decrease. All right, so that's your percent change. Again, we're comparing closing prices, today's closing price and the closing price for the previous day. All right, volume. This is VOL. It's the number of shares that were, let's see, that were sold. It's the number of shares sold. We have the 52-week high-low. And what this is, it's the highest, lowest price for the share over the last 52 weeks. And 52 weeks is a year. So it's going to be the highest, lowest price for this share over the last 52 weeks. And then DIV. This is the dividend. And again, it's how much money you're earning per share. We have the yield. So this dividend yield. Let me double check something here. Yeah. And this is the current, using the current price. All right. Let's check something real quick if they're. Let's see, just want to double check that we're still doing that. Yes, all right. So we're going to go dividend yield. PE. This is the price to earnings ratio. Or put another way, it's purchase price per share divided by the earnings per share. And so that's your price to earnings ratio. Now, finally, the last term we're going to look at YTD, percent change. And so this is the percent change for the price of a share it should be the last calendar year. So these are the terms in the text that they want you to be familiar with. And some of this will come up in the homework. But some of it's sort of different ways of sort of looking at the same thing. Like you could have a, well, let's say, for example, you've got the net change, which gives you the change in absolute dollars, and then the percent change. I mean, it's not quite the same thing there as net change. Actually, it could be show very, very different things. But again, you're just looking how the stock changes, how its price is changing. And net change, I mean, if the stock's really expensive, you know, $100 fluctuation, that sounds like a lot. But if this is like some insanely expensive stock, say, then we'll say it's more realistic, I think would be like maybe there's a $20, well, let's say there's like a $5 change. And it's like, wow, okay, it went up $5. But the stock might be really expensive, and it's like, okay, for what it would cost, it's not changing that much. But the percent change would probably indicate that. So like let's say the share is like $100 a share or something, and it's fluctuating like $5. It went up $5. It's like, wow, is it worth purchasing this? And it's like, well, it's only went up $5. You're going to invest 100. Maybe it's worth it. The percent would be not very much. I mean, you'd see like a 5% change there. So even though $5 might seem like a significant change as far as stock price changes go, the percent change says it's only 5%. So anyway, those are things they just want you to look at, just sort of be familiar with. And there'll be some questions in the homework about this. Any questions, let me know. So bonds. Now bonds, we've seen this where we borrow money from someone. We use it to pay for college, we use it to purchase a car, and maybe purchase a house. Bonds are basically, you're sort of lending to somebody else. You're lending to a corporation or the government. And what they do is they try to do this lending by trying to sell you a bond. So there are usually, this is according to the text, about $1,000 each. And so when you purchase this, what you're doing is you're lending $1,000 to a corporation or the government. And so you're allowing a company or government to borrow this money from you. They're going to borrow this money from you. And because they're borrowing it, they are going to pay it back. And you're going to earn interest. Now, there's some special terminology with bonds. Now, bonds, I don't know if I'm too far off on saying this. They're not known for earning terribly high interest rates. I mean, it's better than what I think savings accounts are earning right now. But, you know, it earns something. And there's some special terminology here. The face value. This is the price of a bond. The coupon. This is just the interest rate. And then finally, we have the maturity date. This is the date when the bond has been promised to be repaid. So with bond problems, they typically ask one of two types of questions. They'll ask for the annual interest paid, and this is going to be a simple interest calculation. And then they'll ask for the total interest paid. And so that would be, say, how much you earn over the life of the bond. So let's see here. And again, we're going to use the simple interest formula. So let's say you purchase $12,000 face value bond. So this is a bond with a face value of $12,000. That's how much this one bond costs. It has an 8-year maturity. So 8 years from now, it'll mature and you get that $12,000 back. And it has a coupon of 2.95%. So the two questions they typically ask with this is what is the annual interest and what's the total interest. So annual interest this is when t equals 1. So to calculate it, use I equals PRT, or I equals, and then P will be the face value of 12,000. R will be the coupon or interest rate as a decimal form. You have to divide this by 100. And when you do, you'll get 0.0295. And then, since this is annual, T is just 1. And let me check this on my calculator. And what you get is $354. So that's how much you earn per year by letting a company or a corporation or the government, well, borrow this money from you. Now, they might have asked you a different question. They might have asked for the total interest. So for this, we got to look at the maturity. And for this problem, the maturity was 8 years. So T in this problem is going to be 8. In other problems, it could be 10 or something else. But for us, in this problem, it's going to be 8. So again, we use the simple interest formula. And we'll have our face value times our coupon as a decimal. And then now we have all the years that we're going to be, well, we're letting someone borrow this money. If we multiply these three numbers together, we get 2,832. So what this says is this: if you've got $12,000 and you can let someone basically borrow that for 8 years, at the end of that 8 years, you get your $12,000 back, and you get almost $3,000 back in addition. So that's the idea with bonds. And as far as investments go, what I've heard is they tend to be considered relatively safe investments. So anyway, so I want to be careful. I'm not an expert on this, but from what I've read before, they're considered relatively safer. I mean, they're promising to pay you back. So anyway, so that's bonds. So the last thing we talk about in this section are mutual funds. And so what they are, they're what's considered an investment trust. And what that is, it's basically, it's a company with stocks and bonds as assets. So they acquire stocks and bonds. And you can kind of think of this, if you're thinking about these stock markets, you might wonder, well, why don't some very clever people, hardworking people, pool their resources together, try to find the best combination of stocks and bonds, and just try to make a business out of that, make a living off doing that. That's kind of what this is, and you can buy into this. You can contribute money and buy some of these stocks and bonds, and in a sense, sort of join into what they're join up with what they're trying to do. Now, the investments of stocks and bonds the stocks and bonds invested in is called a portfolio. So what they've invested in, we call that a portfolio. All right. And so it mentions in the text here as well, and this is something that I've heard stuff like this before. And so what they'll do is they call it diversification. And so what they're mentioning is that you put this portfolio together. You want to put it in a way so you try to reduce some of the risk. And this is where you'll see some bonds mixed in with stocks. And I've heard strategies where people will sometimes, okay, they'll have some sort of safe investments, but they might try something new. Like there's a new startup, they might invest in that startup. I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. So along with going into that startup, we kind of balance that off with some safer investments, just in case that startup doesn't go anywhere, end up losing our money. So we diversify the portfolio. That's what the book is talking about. So now, one of the things they want you to calculate with mutual funds is called the NAV, or the net asset value. And it's kind of like an average. What it is that you take the assets, the value of the assets, minus the liabilities, divided by, and let's see here, the number of outstanding shares. Or, as we simplify this formula, A minus L over N. And this is your NAV. So there's usually a couple things they have you do with this. So there's usually a two-part question they'll ask. So let's say we have a mutual fund. Let's see, has 50 million in total assets. And 1 million in liabilities. And 2 million, not dollars, but 2 million outstanding shares. So first thing they might ask is find the NAV. So to do that is we take assets minus liabilities divided by the number of outstanding shares. Now there's a couple ways you could do this with this problem. We have these 15 million, 1 million, 2 million. Everything's the same order of magnitude. So we could just do 15, this is our assets. And let me put the formula back up here. A minus L over N. Everything's the same magnitude. And when that's the case, we could just do 15 minus 1 over 2. And so that would be the NAV. And it's a dollar amount. So it's going to be $7. Now, if these were different magnitudes, then we might have to actually convert these to numbers. And so the way we would do that is we would say 15 million is 15 times 1 million. Or 15 don't need to write it down anymore. We say 1 million is that. And then the same thing with 1 million. Now, again, since these are all the same magnitude, you don't need to do this. But if these were different magnitudes, like this was 15 million and this was 100,000, we do 15 times 1 million, and then you do 100 times 1,000 to get that number, to get the number that you would get if it was 100,000. So what we're doing here is not necessary for this problem. But if you get problems where you have like 15 million and say 100,000, breaking things down like this isn't a bad way to go. Finally, 2 million. 2 times 1 million. And that's 2 million. And so we do the computation. Now that we've converted everything into actual numbers, I have 15 million minus 1 million over 2 million. This will be 14 million over 2 million. And that comes out again to $7. So again, if you need to convert like a number and there's like a word like that, just take the 15 times 1 million. If instead of 1 million, we had 100,000, you would do 100 times 1,000. So you can translate like that. And then there's some problems where you might need to do that. So we've got our NAV. We've got that. So another question they might ask is this. Let's say you're going to invest $5,000 into this mutual fund. This is part B. So what they'll ask is this. How many shares are you purchasing? So we've got 5,000 and each share is going to be $7. So how many shares, how many $7 amounts are in 5,000? That's how many shares we can get for 5,000. So what we'll do is the investment divided by, excuse me, the NAV. To answer this question, we take how much we're investing, divide by the NAV. So it's going to be $5,000 divided by $7. And so what this comes out to, you want to be careful here. $714.2857 and some other digits. What we're going to do is call this 714. And the reason we're going to, let me double check, that should be, yeah. The reason we're going to do that is you can't purchase just part of a share. Either you get the whole share or you don't. So this means this is just part of a share. And we can't buy just part of it, got to get the whole thing. So the number of whole shares we get, 714. So when you perform this calculation, we want to find the number of whole shares. So we have to discard the fraction part. Even if it was like 0.998, still got to get rid of it. Discard it, and then the whole number, that's the whole number of shares. Well, that's it. That's 11.4. If you have any questions about this section, let me know.